Hello and welcome to this Help Scout discussion on how to hire an amazing support team. I want to thank people for joining us today. There's a few people still joining, so we'll start the discussion proper in a few minutes, but I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so with you. We're going to be talking about a few different aspects of how to find and hire amazing customer service people for your team. Or if you're interested in being hired, find out what it is that customer service hirers are looking for. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Matt Patterson. I work at Help Scout. I talk and teach and learn about great customer service for Help Scout. And before I was here, I was at Campaign Monitor, where I spent 9 years growing our customer service team there from just me to a little over 25 people in the end. So I've had some experience. But joining me today, I have Sarah Judd Welch. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sarah Judd Welch, CEO and Head of Community Design of Loyal. Loyal is a community agency that works with brands to build communities online. And our work is what we call like full circle. We work with companies all the way through from strategy to execution. And we work with really big clients like GE and National Geographic to really early stage ones. And I've hired about 20 community people over the course of the past few years, some of which have been support people.
Fantastic. And also here we have Chase Clemons. Chase, do you want to let us know a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm on the support team over at Basecamp. We're a project management software that kind of helps you control all the chaos that goes on in small businesses. When I first started about 5 years ago, there were a handful of us on the team, and since then we've grown to 24/7 support, and we just hired on another person, so we're at 13 people now on the support team alone. And yeah, we learned a couple of things about hiring along the way, so hopefully I'll be of some help.
Fantastic. So between the three of us, we've got a bit of varied experience in finding great support people and interviewing them and bringing them onto a team and integrating them into a company. So the discussion that we're going to have today is based around Help Scout's latest free ebook, which is also Hiring Your Customer Support Dream Team. Now, Chase and Sarah and I, we all contributed elements to this book, and we're just going to talk about 3 chapters here: finding the right personality, conducting an effective interview, and bringing people on board. But the book itself, that goes into a lot more detail, and it has a bunch of additional topics too. So if you haven't already read this book, I would suggest you go and grab that afterwards, and we're going to send you an email that will have a link to this book, and it will also have a link to our customer service salary study, where you can learn about what top teams are paying their customer service people. So the format today, we're going to have about 30 minutes of discussion between Sarah and Chase and I, and then we'll have about 15 minutes left, hopefully, for Q&A, where we'll try and answer your questions. So if you do think of a question, if you've got a question that comes up at any point during the broadcast, jump on Twitter, tweet @HelpScout, and one of our helpful team will be collecting those questions there, and then when we get to the Q&A section, we will follow up on them at that point. And just so you know, the event is being recorded as well, so if you have to leave at any time, or if you have trouble hearing it or anything like that, it's all recorded, and we can get that to you afterwards if you want to revisit it. And now I think we're ready to get started with our discussion.
Let's get to it.
Fantastic. So personality is important. What makes a great customer service team member? That's what we want to talk about. And I think some jobs have really clear requirements. Like, to do certain jobs you need a degree or you need a license, but customer service is one of those ones that's just not super clear cut, right? Great customer service people can come from very different backgrounds. Certainly it was my experience in hiring. But when we talked for the ebook, when we talked to lots of different people about their customer service hiring, there were some kind of consistent traits that people keep mentioning. And we've got a list here. This is the list from the book. But I'm interested to hear, maybe, let's start with Chase. What is it that you look for when you're interviewing for customer service? Like, what are those traits that really stand out for your company?
Yeah, I think for us, we look for somebody that's a good writer, a clear communicator, and that they also are able to really kind of figure things out on their own. just because every situation that you come across with a customer is going to be a little bit different. So you want somebody that's able to not only figure out how to fix whatever's going on or how to help the customer. So you want to have them do that, but you want to do it in a way that's clear and concise. So tell everybody, one of the famous things that we do is in our application, we ask you to outline the steps of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. For folks that are outside the U.S., we learned that that's not a big thing, evidently, which is just criminal. Like, you should try it. It's fantastic. But basically, walk through the steps of how to make a sandwich for us. And that kind of showcases not only what a person's thought process is like, it also shows how clearly they can communicate that process. So if you got somebody that's given you 150 steps to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like, that's somebody that's a little verbose for us. But if you have somebody that's like, take bread, slap on peanut butter, push it together, that's probably somebody that isn't going to communicate quite as clearly as we want. So yeah, I think that's one of the things we look for. Being able to write, being able to communicate, and being able to do that all while still fixing the problem that the customer has.
Do you ever find people who just refuse to make such a sandwich?
Not yet, but it's always a varied sandwich. So I remember reading one application that was like, here's how we make a Vegemite sandwich. And I was like, I get that reference.
Sarah, what do you look for mostly when you're hiring community people? And do you think that's different than maybe like full-on technical kind of support?
I would say, it's definitely pretty similar. I would say community support people are community people, though not every community person is a support person. So that's like an important distinction to make. For the most part, yes, we hire for all the same traits that Chase just mentioned, someone who's a fantastic communicator and a great problem solver. Though for us, initially what we're screening for at front is this person a community person? And that can be something that's a little bit challenging to discern from someone, particularly in a casual upfront conversation. So what I've done in the past is flat out from the very first time we communicate with someone, if they're submitting an application to Loyal, we ask them, what is a community? And the answers to that question can be incredibly variant depending on who you are, and that will generally clear things up. Does this person understand community? If someone just says, community is social media, I'm like, dude, you haven't done your homework. You're not even on anywhere on the board. But also when someone is naturally a community person, it just really shows in their answer. They have an incredible enthusiasm in the way they attack that question. And then when you ask them a little bit further, in what way are you a community person, that's when it really shines. It really becomes drawn out that this person is naturally empathetic, they care about people, they have this innate desire to help others. And that's something that cannot be taught. It's something that really is a part of someone. And no matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, by asking those questions what is a community and in what way are you a community person, that will very clearly split out the group between who's a good fit and who is not. And then, of course, for Loyal, we also like people who operate relatively autonomously and are able to solve problems, very similar to what Chase had mentioned. So I actually don't really have a great way to shake that out yet in interviews. So it's something that I've been thinking more about, particularly with some of our recent hires, is how can we figure out very quickly if someone is able to solve problems on their own and act quickly rather than needing to be handheld through a client engagement. And I would assume that the best way to gauge that is to ask them about projects that they've led from start to finish and how they've taken initiative in those engagements.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think the trying to understand what you're looking for, but also how do you find that in an interview situation, which is
right,
not particularly
not the real world.
And we will. That's our next topic to touch on. So we'll probably come back to that. But I think there's probably a couple of things here to talk about those traits. Have you guys ever watched the show Bar Rescue?
No, what's that?
John Taffer, yes.
Yes. So it's a US television show. It's like a US version of Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, which probably you've also not seen. But he just goes around and shouts at people about why their bar is terrible, basically, and tells them what to do. Garn Taffer! He's very excitable. But I read his book. I don't know why. Someone recommended it to me, I think. But I read his book, and he has a section in there about hiring bar staff and restaurant staff. And a very, very similar approach of sit down and really work out what are the traits of the person that you want to have in your business. Because once you have that very clear idea of who you're looking for, it's less likely you'll get thrown off by like someone who has a good CV, a good work experience that matches. And certainly that's the mistake that I've made more than once, is going too much towards someone who had really good experience fit and forgetting the personality traits that would fit in with the team.
Also made that same mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's a very easy trap.
The real intangible that we really can't train for, right, is somebody going to be empathetic? Are they going to take care of our customers and our clients? Are they somebody that we can trust to say the right thing at the right time and that kind of thing? And that's hard to look for. I mean, not look for. It's hard to like see if somebody's got that, especially if you're just looking at a resume or whatnot. But I think, some of the questions that you can kind of tease that out, you can ask them about, what's an example of when you let somebody down and how did you fix that? And the way that they talk about that situation is going to tell you a lot. We had a couple of applications where the tone was just completely off, and they were talking about how they, I remember there was a couple of them where they mentioned hating their customers or something like that. That's obviously an instant not fit.
Whoa.
So if you see like people beating up on their current customers, they're probably not going to do well with your customers. But I think those are the things that are really important to hire for. Those intangible, empathetic, personality kind of things. You can train all the other stuff. You can train somebody how to write how to send an email or how to work an app or that kind of thing. But I can't teach you to care about somebody if you don't.
I'm very wary of people who try overly hard to be people persons in their interviews. Like, for example, like we've all read Dale Carnegie and his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I've become very cognizant of people who are overt students of Dale Carnegie and that they tend to be less authentic in the way that they communicate and the way
Is that
in which
right, Sarah? I'm going to mention your name.
And it really irks me when I find that people are taking these lessons that are core to how to interact with people and sort of commoditizing them in a way that makes it feel less valuable, but subtly not nice. It's like a salesperson who has learned all the tricks and tools, but is still selling you.
Yeah. I think sometimes in that period of hiring, but when you've got someone you're interested in, social media is kind of helpful in a way because you can often see their public interactions.
Yes.
And some people who seem really good in their application, who write a really nice cover letter and seem super positive, and then if you check out their Twitter, just constantly complaining about everything.
Right. And of course, we're all people. We can all have our complaints sometimes, but the way in which you complain can also say a lot.
Yes, there's definitely different attitudes can come through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. There are certain things that you can change about people. You can change the way they communicate, and you can, help people learn problem-solving skills and technical skills. But helping someone's kind of base attitude towards other people is probably not worth the effort that it would take, even if you could do it.
Yeah.
But let's move on. So let's say you've found the people that you're interested in, and you need to actually select out of them. And interviews are probably not a great way to find out who's a good fit. It's a very limited amount of time that you have with somebody. It's an unnatural thing. It's not really the job that they're going to be doing anyway. Although to some degree, maybe you can change that. And I think Chase, you guys have a bit of a system of getting people to interact with the rest of the team?
Yeah, so whenever we find the couple of people we actually want to move on to the next stage, a couple of things happen. The first being they go through a second phone interview after their first one with another person just to make sure that that second person that's doing the interview still is on track and has like good vibes from the candidate. That's just to make sure, there are some people that are better at hiring than others. Like with our team, Marissa has never let us wrong with anybody that she's interviewed, and having her do a second interview and just kind of back check and make sure we didn't miss anything is a great kind of check, basically. But after that, we do, instead of meeting them for coffee, we're all remote, so we go in and have a campfire chat with them. We, invite them in and basically just kind of shoot the breeze with them for about 30 minutes or so, just to fill them out. It does a couple of things. The first being, this gives us a really good, clear sense of who they are when they have to rely completely on a chat, text-based interaction. Are they able to communicate clearly still? Do they have a little bit of fun? Do they pepper in emojis and GIFs and that kind of thing in their conversation? Like, those are all big plus ones from us, and two, it also helps us kind of get a vibe for, can they have this interaction with us? Can they be completely remote, and hang out and still have a good culture and a good relationship with their teammates? So, having that campfire chat's just kind of a second step that makes sure, that we're really, really vibing with a person.
Yeah, I think that's a good technique. And I think Automatic, WordPress do a similar thing, right, of trying to chat-based, because if the job is all about writing, then making the interview more about writing makes sense. For me...
Yeah, I think we stole that from them way back, because I originally heard about it from Chase Livingston over at Automatic. So with his interview with Matt, all of the candidates roll through their CEO, Matt. Matt is going to have it used to be a Skype conversation. I think it's a Slack conversation with you now. But basically, it's a conversation that can take, is spaced out over multiple days. So you kind of, have a conversation for a minute, then he darts off to do something, and then you dart off to do something else, and then he comes back and leaves a question, and then you answer that question, and it kind of takes a couple of days. But again, since you're remote, that's such a vital part. Like, it's cool if you can hang out well in an office space, but if you can't handle being remote, then that's probably not a good hire. So something like that kind of chat interview really helps, just to kind of make sure that it's still a good fit.
Yeah, for me, some of the best hires that I made were ones where it was somebody that I had some interactions with over a period of time. So both of these happened on a boat, or at least a significant part of the kind of process happened on a boat for me. So after a conference, someone I'd met at a conference, and then at the social event after the conference, just spending some time in a natural environment where it's not officially an interview, so nobody feels like they're being judged or tested, and it's just, hey, we have similar philosophy about how we treat our customers, or this is someone that I feel like has experience that would be useful, to my company, even though I'm not necessarily looking to hire at that time. But when I do come to hire, then I think about those people like, oh, well, here's someone that I really have a good sense of what it would be like to work with them, and that's it's worked out to be a pretty good indicator. Like, if there's someone that I can spend time with and feel like we both got something useful out of that conversation, that's great. It's so much better than an interview where, at best people are nervous, or they're putting on a kind of personality that they think is appropriate for an interview because they don't know you yet, you don't know them, and
yeah, it's like a false environment.
Yeah, it's like being in a zoo.
Yeah. When we're hiring for Loyal, we're often hiring very quickly according to what projects are closing. So at Loyal, we work on an assembled team model, which means that we're bringing in people, a unique team for every single project. And oftentimes it's like a reoccurring cast of people, though sometimes we're bringing in people for unique roles. And for me, like, one, I try to anticipate those people, like what roles we're going to need as far in advance as possible, though I never want to be in the position where I need to make like a shotgun hire. So I'm passively interviewing people constantly in more casual settings, much like what you were describing, Matthew. And yeah, I found it to be far more effective in like learning about who this person is and how they might complement Loyal's existing team, but also generally how they think about and approach the world.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think the more you can get away from that kind of like one and done interview process,
right,
the better sense you're going to have of like, is this a person that's really going to fit? So on the screen, you should be able to see there, like, storytelling is a great technique. I think when I was a younger interviewer, I was not so good at this. Like, I would kind of come out of every interview thinking, oh, that person was really good, just mostly because I wasn't that good at asking questions. And I eventually figured out, like, there's a difference between asking somebody, if this happened, what would you do? And can you tell me about a time when this did happen to you and tell me what you did?
Yeah.
Get a much better
I often like to use these storytelling type questions as like dual questions. So like one, getting them to tell a story and or a process, much like what Chase referenced earlier, though having a specific point in that story. So for example, for Loyal, one of the questions that I always ask is, tell me about a time when you had to advocate on behalf of someone else. And like, advocation is a really interesting skill set because it's also something that it tends to be more innate to some people than others, and it's widely applicable across all community and support roles. And oftentimes when you hear someone tell that story of like, tell me about a time when you had to advocate, the stories they tell are sometimes a little bit mundane. Like, for example, someone might tell the story of how they advocated on behalf of a junior hire, or they advocated across or for their sorority in college, or one time someone told me a story about they advocated on behalf of their little brother to their mom. But like, the fact that they like know what that is and what that means and are able to articulate their role in that is like a really interesting case study in how that person might advocate on behalf of a customer, such as to a support team for something that a customer needs or something to that effect. The other question that I might ask is, tell me about a time when something went wrong and how it was resolved. And that, again, is another story. But the interesting thing about that question is listening to how people talk about other people in that scenario. A really fantastic community or support hire will acknowledge their own role in that scenario, and or if it totally was not their fault, they're very objective and nice about it. Though someone who is not a great fit will be a little bit, they'll lean more towards the side of blaming someone else or not taking responsibility, and then more like Band-Aid fixes rather than full circle, complete fixes that actually solve the problem and prevent it from happening again going forward. So that's one thing we do. And I also like to ask really complex questions, like questions with 2, 3, 4 parts. And that's something that I got from the interview for my very first job out of college, which, hard to believe, was at Goldman Sachs. I can't believe I worked there, but it happens. And I had heard about this type of interview when I was going into my interviews at Goldman, though I had never experienced one. And I was the lucky person that got like drawn to have this type of interview, and it's called a stress interview. So in this interview, they sit you down, and their entire goal of the interviewer is to freak you out, to like just make you sweat bullets and stress out. And you're intended to like regain control of the conversation in a nice way. So I don't do this often to people that I interview, but I sometimes will, particularly if they're performing very well. I tend to be a lot more nice about it, though. And I won't try to like freak them out or anything, but asking really complex questions requires them to, one, listen very closely, but two, be able to tell like a chronological story between all the answers to the questions. But two, like, it is a little bit of a stressful scenario in seeing how they deal with that. Like, for example, you might forget the last question, and that's totally okay. And it's fine to ask what the last question was, though to like freak out about it or to ignore it altogether can sometimes be a red flag.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think in customer service, you do get those sorts of issues where you're like, I'm dragged into this ticket that's been going on for 3 days already, and there is 20 questions in there, and that's when customers start to get really bad service, because I mean, I had this experience just yesterday with Google, thank you Google, where I ended up having to explain over and over and over again to people what the problem was, and they all wanted to go through the same process that I'd already been through because they weren't reading the whole history. But yeah, I could have used someone who'd gone through a bit of a stress test, I think. I didn't find it.
Or at least have the diligence to like dig through all of those layers.
Yeah. I just wanted somebody who was like, I'm not going to talk to you until I understand what you've already explained, which they, it's very frustrating. Well, let's move on to our last section. I think we're running short on time there, so I do want to say, if you haven't read the ebook, go and read the ebook, especially around that checking references. I think there's some really good stuff in there that we haven't got time to cover, but it's a super useful question about how to make reference checking more useful when you're about to make a hire. But let's move on to onboarding. So when you've selected the right person or the right people from the interview process, how do you bring them onto your team and make sure that they fit? And there's something there. You kind of feel like you've done the best job. You've done the job by finding somebody already. You think that all my work here is done. I've hired them and they're on the team now, but it can still go wrong. And Chase, do you want to tell us about when someone gets hired, what happens to them in between and when they start?
Yeah, sure. So when you start with us, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to either go where you are or fly you into some city where we are. The first 2 weeks or so is going to be in-person training, just because being remote is great, but for that first kind of 2 weeks, as you're, even the most mundane things like setting up your computer and setting up new accounts and passwords and all that kind of thing, it's a little bit easier if you can do it in person with a couple of people. So we usually have 5 or 6 of us that go to some city, some location, and work with that person individually. That person will have a support buddy, basically. It's going to be one person that is focused on their training. It's going to be the person that they talk to every day. Not that they don't talk to other people, but like a primary point of contact there. So it's the person they're doing the training every day, that's doing the weekly check-ins and making sure that they're making progress. Every new hire that we have has basically a template project that we set up in Basecamp that we go through. That way, at the end of week 1, we say you should be able to do X, Y, and Z. And when you can do that, it takes that imposter feeling out a little bit. Like when I was first hired, my first week or so was like, am I doing enough? Are they going to fire me at the end of the week? Like, am I still good? Having some kind of benchmarks or goals or whatnot really helps kind of alleviate that anxiety for new people. But yeah, that's the big stuff. We do an in-person training the first couple of weeks. We make sure they have a support buddy that is really there to answer any questions that they've got, that they can ask, even like stupid questions like, I just got a company Amex card. What stuff can I really put on it and what not to? So like those kind of office questions things, and have that template in place. That way they don't feel so anxious about the training. You've hired them for the team. This should be a great welcoming experience onto your team, not one that's full of the whole Game of Thrones thing. The night is dark and full of terrors and all that. It should not be anything like that.
I hope most of the hiring process is not like Game of Thrones. It's probably not a great model.
King of the North.
So Help Scout does, I think, a really good job of this, actually. And I, having only been here for a few months, I've just been through the process. But one of the things I really liked was there's not that huge gap. Some jobs I've had in the past, you get the offer, and you sign the thing, and you send it back, and then you hear nothing until the day you're meant to start. And that's kind of terrifying. They're like, what is this? Especially for a remote job, like, is this actually real? Or is this just...
No, just kidding.
I dream this, yeah.
You do not have a job.
My mom asked me for a good 3 weeks before I started, is this a real company? Do they do real things? Did you really get a job?
Yes. Mums, I remember getting my first job as a web designer at the stock exchange. So that's not a small company. But my mum asking me, but what happens when you finish the website?
That's a great question.
I don't think that's going to be a problem, but yeah.
I mean, it could be finite, from your mom's point of view.
That's true. That is true. So Help Scout, so they provided me kind of a drip feed of contact in the period between agreeing to join and actually joining, so that I never felt like I was being abandoned. It was always like, here's the plan for what's coming up, and like, this week here's an email. You can set up your Slack account a little bit before you start, so you kind of can jump in there and make sure you're set up for day one. So I had a really clear sense of what the company is like to deal with, and also felt like, yeah, when I start, I'm not going to be just scrambling around trying to get everything together. I'll be like day one.
Is it an automated drip marketing campaign?
That's a good question. I think there's a combination of, yeah, they add somebody to the list and they get certain emails, but then different people will provide individual interactions as well, depending on the role.
Okay, more personalized.
Yeah, I know at Campaign Monitor, in my past role, we did that too. There was the hiring manager just had to add the person's email address to a list, and they would automatically get the thing that told them, like, yeah, when you come to Sydney for your first week, this is what we wear, so you don't feel like you come in a suit and everyone's wearing jeans.
It's a very important piece of information, particularly for women, I have to say.
Totally. I think these are all those things that seem small when you're in the company and you're comfortable and confident, but when you're new and scared about, like, am I doing the wrong thing? All that kind of framework is super helpful.
Yeah, down to little stuff too, like tell your team how to get from the airport to the hotel to the office. Like that can be really daunting if you're headquartered in or if you're visiting or whatever a major city. I remember the first time I flew into Midway in Chicago, like you're presented with like this big bustling city and you're like, I think I'm going to the right place, but I'm not entirely for sure.
Yeah, the confidence building. I think a big part of that is once you've started in the job, knowing that you're doing a good job or knowing that someone will tell you if you're doing the wrong thing is another issue. I remember having one of my team members in the past tell me, I thought I was going to get fired for the first 3 months. And she was doing an amazing job, and so I hadn't said anything much about it to her because I thought, if she's not, I'll tell her. But what she really needed was someone to say, look, I recognize, yes, you are doing the right thing and you're doing it well. And this is how you can tell that you're doing a good job. That kind of structure and framework for her would have been super helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting. For Loyal, when we're onboarding new people, again, we tend to do it very quickly. Sometimes it happens that we are signing client contracts and then signing contractor contracts and then starting a project in the same day, which is never an ideal scenario, but occasionally it does happen, just the way that it works in agency life. And so we need our team members, when they come into Loyal and walk into that first client meeting, to be ready to go, literally within an hour. So what I'll do for every new hire is I'll spend probably 2 to 3 hours the night before preparing everything for them. And usually what that is one, setting up all their Google apps. For some reason, Loyal's Google accounts default to Indonesian. So I have to go into all of their primary Google apps, like their Gmail, their calendar, their Drive, and change it to English, which the only word I know in Indonesian is settings. That's something that I do right away because I don't want them to freak out as soon as they get into their inbox and see a language that they don't understand. And then I'll send them an email with their email login and a password that I've created for them, and it's usually change me Sarah 1, something that's super obvious that is templated. And then as soon as they log into their email address, which is in English, there's a couple of primary documents. The first email that they see is something that says read me first, and it's an onboarding for the client project. And that will include everyone who's on the project, their names and their roles, and usually a fun fact about them. And then a link to an onboarding document that also has the kickoff guide for our first meeting with the client. And in that document, it'll be any relevant background information on the project, the name of everyone and their role, who's going to be in the meeting, and a link to their LinkedIn, as well as any other random information that might be helpful for them. So for example, here's the link to their app in the Apple Store, download this. Also, here's their #1 competitor. And it just sort of sets the tones. They're able to go into the meeting, and even if they don't feel 100% like they know what's going on, they're able to fake it and ask intelligent questions. And also, prior to that, before they've even logged into their email address, in their contract with Loyal, we provide them with the entire client's contract and engagement, and they're able to see beyond just their specific role. If they are, for example, a community strategist, they're able to see the community strategy portion, but they are also able to see like the support setup that we're working on, or like the brand communications or the identity design that's happening, so they're able to see how their work fits into a full scope of the project. And that sort of like adds a lot of clarity. And then also within that document, within every single client proposal, we have sort of like a values section that we provide to our clients. And by that point, by the time that this person is joining Loyal, I know that they fit in with those values, though this person might not have yet explicitly seen that spelled out. So we provide this to them as like a guideline for how to make decisions moving forward with clients. So for example, it's okay to say no to a client because they're hiring us for expertise, and like you know best what's best for a user. So it's like we tell them flat out, like it's okay to say no, stuff like that. And that sort of just sets the tone with any of our new hires, where they're able to walk into a project and know pretty much exactly what they're doing and what they're getting into.
So you're kind of looking to set them up for success, right? Like,
exactly.
Here are all the things that you need in order to be able to do a good job, and we're going to not make you hunt around for them. Which happens in a lot of roles, I think, is like...
Yeah, true. And also in their inbox is like an invite to Slack and an invite to Basecamp, which we use in all of Loyal's projects. That's pretty much it. And then I delete all the spam things that Google sends when you first set up an account. So I don't have to deal with it.
They do like to do that.
I just love that it's Indonesian. Like, that should be their first test. Like, can you figure out how to change the setting? If you are, then you get to stay.
That would be so cruel.
I would tell you to, you could probably get that sorted out with Google's help, but I'm not confident anymore.
I know you know, Matt. It sounds like you have your own experiences with Google support.
Hey, Chase, how do new support people at Basecamp get interaction with other teams in the company?
Yeah, so when we do the trainings that first couple of weeks, we usually try to bring in whoever happens to be in that city. And two, I should point out that whenever we do a training like that, anybody can show up in the city if they want and kind of hang out and be part of that training too. So a good example, last week and this week, we're training a new European hire. So she flew into Manchester, where a couple of programmers and a couple of support people were already at. So she's doing the training, but she's also sitting right across from a programmer or right across from a designer, so getting kind of experience with that too, which is really nice. The other thing is, with all of our projects, they tend to be pretty open. So I can pop into like a programmer's chat room whenever I want and interact with anybody there. And we really encourage that because, sometimes if a designer's working on a problem, then somebody from support is going to be able to help out with that and provide a customer experience. A customer perspective for it. So knowing, right away that, knowing that kind of cross-team training is already there from the very beginning, it makes things a lot easier in the long run. Another thing, especially with your new hires, they are fresh eyes on not only your onboarding process, not only on your training, but also on your product. So your brand new hire is going to be in a great position to be basically a brand new customer. And the more you can get them talking to designers and developers and things, the more they're going to share their experience, that kind of first-time experience with them.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's super helpful to make sure that they're confident and comfortable, because asking someone to give us feedback on our product in their first few weeks is pretty scary if they're not pretty solid about, I know my position and what I'm meant to be doing in this company before I start giving you advice. All right, so we've run over our time a little bit, of course, and we have a couple of questions that I think we should discuss here. So, Chase, I'm going to go back to you actually. Does Basecamp hire people for customer service who aren't from a customer service background?
Yeah, all the time. We're looking for people. I guess that's a weird way to say it, right? But we're not looking for, have you specifically been in a customer support role before, or have you specifically been in a customer service role working for whatever, right? We're we've got people that are librarians that will, in their last job, they were librarians, they were apartment managers. Before I joined up, I was managing a restaurant, which is kind of customer service and kind of a bunch of other different things at the same time. But yeah, I mean, your background is important, but it's more what's the result of your background. Are you going to be a better people person because of jobs that you've had in the past? Like, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for you did 3 years at Apple support.
Yeah, although it's not necessarily a disqualification, presumably.
Yeah, Apple not. Google maybe.
Yeah. This is just turning into a Google bashing webinar now. Sorry, Google. Please don't disconnect me from Google Hangouts. So a question here, do you all, like those attributes, are they always the same or do they change over time? The attributes we talked about, hiring and personality, which I think is a good question. And for me, I know that what I was looking for when Campaign Monitor, when the team was very small, I needed people who were much more kind of independent, brought a lot of experience in with them, and had probably more experience, more technical skills, because we didn't have that many systems and tools at the time. The documentation was pretty sparse, and the product was changing a lot, and so there wasn't like a big system to train someone up onto the tools and the system and to give them the background they needed. So they kind of needed to have that when I hired them. And one of the mistakes that I made was switching from looking for those people to people with more general backgrounds too early when I didn't have the systems in place, and so it just created a whole bunch of work where we realized, oh, people don't necessarily have this knowledge that I have and that these other two people I'd hired have. We'd brought that with us, and it just wasn't clear until I hired someone without it that like not everybody has that skill. And that's where had to go back and adjust, like, okay, the thing that I'm actually looking for is this list of things now. And then if we wanted to be able to hire people who have a broader background, then we're going to need to have some training in place, and we're going to need to have a knowledge base. And so we built those things out, and then we could hire people with different backgrounds and different skill sets and bring them in and make them successful too. I don't know, Sarah, if you've had any experience with like changing who you're looking for different roles?
I think in Loyal's early days, we focused a lot more on the experience that someone had in community and support roles, like day-to-day type of community management, the experience working with product teams and closing the loop between product and support. These days, we less than looking for specific experiences and attributes. We look a little bit more holistically for community people. And then the reason for that is because the roles that we hire for now are significantly more diverse than they used to be. Though, like very much what Chase had said earlier, there's a lot of different ways someone can have relevant transferable skills.
Awesome. I think you're right. Like, you just need to keep revisiting these things, right? Of like, what is the appropriate thing that I need now and for this situation? Yeah. Another great question here from, let me see, Andrew Long, who says, how do you keep support people motivated to stay in support rather than, lose them to another team? Chase, have you any ideas on that? Start with you.
So one of the first things that we make clear up front with every job opening that we post is that this is a support job. It's not a stepping stone to something else. In the beginning, we saw people that were applying for the support position, but their real goal was like, I really want to be a designer at Basecamp, or I really want to be a programmer or whatnot. And those kind of people, like, we weren't looking for that. We were looking for people that were going to be on the support team, taking care of customers for the long haul. So part of it is first making up front really, really clear, like, this is a career in support, and if you're not looking for that, then we're probably not a good fit. The second thing is, especially with software companies, when you first start out, it's really easy to kind of get in a rut with customer interactions. Like you kind of get to a point where you just see like, oh, yet another customer email, yet another customer call, yet another customer chat that I have to do. And that can kind of be demoralizing and demotivating really quick if you end up as I think Carolyn from Buffer called it a queue monkey or something like that. What you want instead is somebody that has interest and has projects throughout the customer experience. You want people who aren't afraid to go, I think that we should be offering live chat to our customers. So I'm going to lead a project to make that happen. Or I think our knowledge base can be better for our customers. I'm going to lead the project and make that happen. Those managers of one that you were talking about earlier, Matthew. I think when you have different projects that people can have interest in and can lead and can make happen, like that is a big motivation for them, rather than just I've got yet another customer email to answer.
Yeah, I think this is a huge topic in customer service, and there's probably no one answer, right? But what there needs to be is lots of different paths for support people who want to stay in it for the long term. Some people are never going to be long term, but can do a really amazing job for a couple of years, and maybe that's fine. But to Andrew's question, I guess, if you've got people who want to stay in but also want to keep growing, then you need to find some options. Yeah, project work, like you were saying. Some people can be team leaders and managers, and that's a path that's pretty well established. Some people can become, especially in the software world, like technical specialists in certain areas. Like I'm a support person, but now I specialize in integrations with other products, and I'm the deep knowledge person in that area, or deliverability, or coding, or whatever it is that your product or your service fits.
Part of the challenge might be is that the perception is that support does not have a career trajectory. But we all know, having been inside or having worked with very customer-driven companies, that that's not true. That there is a career path for support, particularly within companies who care a lot about the value that they provide to their customers on an ongoing basis. So I would say that perception that people who might look at support as a stepping stone, they're not working at the right companies.
Yeah, so it might come to your hiring as well, making it clear that what we're looking for is people who want to do this as a career, and then we will support you in making sure that even though you're doing the same job, you're actually progressing, growing in skill, you're getting paid better, you feel like the time that I'm spending is worthwhile in my career.
Yeah.
Sarah, I've got a question that you can start with here from Jack Sexton, who said, do you find any common trends in experiences and backgrounds in people who are like really successful in customer service?
I find that people who are very successful in customer service and in community generally have very wide-ranging experiences with people. Like maybe they studied abroad, or they were a nanny, something that is like a little bit unusual and off the beaten track, that allows them to, one, have like very diverse experiences interacting with people, but two, have very interesting life experience to bring to the table, which allows them to be a little bit more empathetic towards others.
Yeah, I've hired someone who was a nanny and someone who was a doula before.
A doula, that's a good one.
Yeah, like that's dealing with people in a pretty stressful situation. So there's a lot of crossover in a lot of those things. I think, like Chase was saying before, people with very diverse backgrounds can be really good at customer service, because the core of what you need is not necessarily a technical skill or a particular piece of experience with a technology.
You need someone who can talk to a lot of different types of people.
Yeah. What do you think, Chase? Is there similarities between the types of people that are successful?
I think they're, like I mentioned earlier, they're people, right? They're people who genuinely enjoy interacting with other people, whether it's your customers or team members or whatever. That's the big trait for me. If somebody doesn't like interacting with people, if they don't like, having conversations with other people, then that's fine. They just might not be a good fit for a customer-oriented kind of role. Everything else, like you mentioned, comes and goes, right? Tech skills come and go. Even to some degree, like how well you can write. We can take somebody that is an okay writer and make them into a good writer through some training and things. But if you're not a people person like that, that's hard to train in.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that was a great question too. It makes me think, like, these things all tie together, right? The the way that you come up with that list of personality traits, and this is kind of how I did it, was let's look at the people in my team, who are the top performers in terms of volume of work, but also who are the people that make it just a nice team to work in, and who are the people that really connect with customers well, and let's figure out like what are the personality traits from all of the people I already work with that kind of define the perfect person that we're looking for. So once you have a team, or if you've worked in a team like that, you can kind of use that as your model too. So I think those are our questions for now. Let's have a look just to make sure I didn't miss anybody. If I did miss anybody, then please feel free to contact us and we will get back to you anyway. But in general, any last words, Sarah or Chase, on hiring for customer service? Like if you were giving advice to somebody who's like, what's the one big thing that they should take away?
I was going to say ladies first.
Is that your advice, or is that your...
My advice in hiring for support is that, I think particularly in tech, we have the tendency to deprioritize that role, though your support hire is probably the most critical hire that you will make in the first few years of your company. They will literally make or break your company and change your customer experience. So
yeah,
hire very, very wisely. Take hiring for this role as seriously as you would take hiring an engineer.
I think that's
great.
And
I would say you don't, there are some things you can be behind the ball with hiring, kind of. If you find yourself needing another programmer, that's something that you can kind of be like, oh crap, I need to hire another programmer, and then kind of start hiring. With support, it's always this growing number of customers. So where you're, how many people you talk to today is not going to be the same 2 weeks or 2 months down the road. So you've got to kind of be a little forward thinking here. You got to go, how many people do I anticipate needing in 3 months, and then start looking for them today, because it might take you 3 months to find them and then train them. So kind of stay ahead of the ball on hiring when it comes to support.
You never want to be behind that.
All right, that's really good. I think we've got a follow-up from Jack, who's looking for more detail, I guess, on that long-term engagement. How do we get people really involved? And I think this is a topic that Help Scout will be talking about more, because I think it's pretty core to what we do. And I just wanted to pass on I was talking to someone, Taylor at Survey Gizmo, who was saying that she has in her team she's kind of rolled out a system where the support people can achieve different levels, according to if you've done certain types of tickets, if you've developed certain skills in certain areas, and you can prove that through pointing at work that you've done, that you can kind of level up your skills, and it gives people a bit of a path that they can follow if they want to stay directly in support but still progress and become more senior and get more responsibilities and that kind of thing. Laying out a really clear path for them makes it much easier for somebody. But I think, look out for more from Help Scout on that topic in the coming months. And one final question before we wrap it up. If I was to say to either of you, what is the thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you started doing this kind of work? Let's start with Chase this time.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing is that, especially in the tech industry, that imposter syndrome is really, really is something you're going to deal with. Especially, I was completely outside of the tech world. I got hired on by Basecamp. It was at the time 37 Signals, and people were looking and going, "How in the world did you get a job there?" They hire cream of the crop 1% kind of people. How did you get that right out of the gate? Which led to me being am I supposed to be here? Was it a good hire? So I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, your new hires, that's going to be kind of their first entry into it. And it took me a while to realize that was happening in other people too, that it wasn't just some crazy Chase thing that he was hyperventilating about. So yeah, go back and think, I wish I had known what I wish I had known then was that your experience is not unique. The other people you're going to hire are going to be just like you. So kind of, use that to your advantage. The things that you were anxious about or ecstatic about in the beginning, that's the things that your new hires are going to be anxious and ecstatic about. So use that experience,
Great advice. Sarah, same question.
The only thing I can think of is that today I put a lot more weight on portfolios over resumes and pedigrees. Don't worry so much about where people come from. Worry about who they are and what they've done that could set them up for success with your company.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, I think that we've hit our time limit there, and if there are other questions that you have, if you're listening in, you've got a question, or if you're listening to it later and you've got a question, send an email to support@helpscout.com, and we're happy to talk to everybody about this kind of stuff. I want to say a big thank you to Chase and Sarah for contributing their time and expertise there. If you want to talk to them on Twitter, Sarah, you are at SJW, and Chase is at Chase Clemons. I'm at Mr. Patto, MRPATTO. So feel free to talk to any of us. I'm sure we're all keen to have those conversations. And from now, so this is being recorded, and we'll have that recording available. Again, you can email in for that. But you're also going to get sent an email shortly. And that email will have a link to the full ebook, which goes into more detail, as I said, and has a few more chapters that we didn't cover. And it'll also link to our recent customer service salary study, which will be useful for hiring too. And it's got an offer in there where you can check out Help Scout if you need a support tool of any kind. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate your time today, and I hope to see you again at another webinar.
Thank you, Matthew, for organizing.
All right. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Have a good one.